tent and just carrying them on.
Yep.
Right.
Like, you know what it is? It's a lot like in a lot of my work in capital. Like when there's a product, whatever it is, that doesn't make enough money for a AAA to care about it, but it makes money. Like you could make money with it if you're willing to make less money.
I remember they would always have like superhero shows on there, like your Smallville or whatever, and it's like not a big hit, but dedicated and big enough fan base, right? Let's carry it on. I think the Penn and Teller like Fool Us show is still on that channel, running for a zillion seasons. Right?
That's an okay show. I've actually watched some episodes of it.
I just see occasional clips on YouTube when because they let the magicians post their own performance on the Magicians channel.
Yep. Well, similarly, I don't watch whole episodes of Taskmaster. I just watch YouTube videos of particularly good tasks. A listener came in right away. Quote, after 2 years build up to this review, I kind of just want Rim to say, "Meh, it's all right." And then hard cut to, "This has been Geek Nights with Rim and Scott." It's not April.
All right.
All right. So I already went live. We're just good to go. I already hit record. All right. It's Thursday, February 3rd, 2022. I'm Rim.
I'm Scott.
And this is Geek Nights. Tonight on the GeekNights Book Club, we review the first novel, The Tale of Genji. All right. So I think more so than other book club books, this one deserves a little bit of a meta preamble.
Well, so first of all, according to the Geek Nights website database, we announced that this was the book club book on June of 2019.
June 20th, 2019, which 2019 was 1,000 years ago. 2019 was a different world.
Yeah. So basically, the world went to poop, and also the book itself is hard to read, and lots of things happened.
It was interesting. I didn't actually, we announced it in June, and usually when we start a new book club book, I don't actually start reading it right away. I'd wait a few weeks, and I started reading it, and we'll talk about, what that was like, but in terms of just the meta part, and I was plugging along. I was, 7 or 8 chapters in, slow and steady. I was enjoying it, but I'd had this
50 some odd chapters, so that's not bad.
And I was reading it mostly when I was commuting or sitting at a restaurant, at lunch, at work. I'd sit at a restaurant for an hour having my lunch, and I'd read for an hour, and then we'd go on trips.
I was reading it mostly. I had the Kindle app on my phone, and then I would open it on the subway.
Yep.
Right.
You could, that was one, especially early chapters of Genji, 2 subway trips, you could finish a chapter, actually.
But that's also why I hadn't start reading it right away, because in June I was biking to work.
Yep, same. And so I started reading it on the subway toward the end. I didn't
start reading it till September 2019.
Yep. But then, as you all know, in March, the world shut down and everything changed, and for about a year, I didn't read a lot. We talked about this on Geek Nights a bunch, but it was this weird situation I'd never been in my life up to this point, where most of the time I would spend reading was traveling or laying on a beach, all the context I had where I would generally sit down and read for a long period of time, fiction. All those activities disappeared from my life because of COVID. Plus, the world was weird and stressful, especially in those early days. It's easy to not really internalize how stressful those first 6 months were when none of us knew how this was going to go. So, a lot of things got in our way of reading this book, not just the book itself.
A lot of times when you see professional athletes give interviews, they're I don't want to make excuses. But here I'm let's make some perfectly valid excuses. You got a valid excuse? Don't give me invalid excuses. But listen, if you have valid excuses for things, use them. As long as they're valid, it's okay. Valid excuse.
This book would have taken us a while without COVID. It wouldn't have taken us this long, but based on the trajectory we had before COVID, we would have done this show probably summer of 2020. Really, that's when it would have happened.
More late 2020.
If there had been zero COVID by August 31st, I think it's plausible we would have done the show. Definitely by the end of the year 2020.
Yeah. But anyway, now that I finished it, my appetite for reading has returned voraciously. The next book club book, which I guess we announced at the end of the show as per usual.
Yep.
I'm already 80% done.
Well, because you seem to have thought that I had already read it, but no, Emily read it, and I was really excited to read it, and I bought it. I read one chapter and thought, holy shit, this is the next book club book.
The prologue or the first chapter?
Oh, the prologue. I didn't actually even get through the first. I read the prologue, and based on what I knew from Emily, this book is so up our alley.
Anyway. So, Tale of Genji. We finally read this whole damn book.
Yep.
It is the first novel ever written by any person. There were many long forms of literature, of fictional literature before the Tale of Genji, such as, like, I don't know, the Odyssey, which we already did the book club on.
Yep. But the Odyssey was not
is an
written.
Epic poem. It's not a novel.
Also, it was not written as a book. It was an oral tradition later transcribed.
Yep.
But
exactly.
and also it was from, what's really fascinating is it was like the Odyssey was around 725 BC and the Tale of Genji is around 1000 AD.
Yep. So 1700 years apart.
But meanwhile, Rome didn't fall until about 400 years after the Tale of Genji was written.
So did Rome have novels? Or did they not receive the invention of the novel yet?
Yep. That's
From
something
Japan.
that it's an aside that I think about a lot, and I wish history books did, like history classes did more, was sort of always zoom out from any zoomed in lesson to just talk about the state of the entire world at some time. Like America's cowboys were a very short time, but like what was going on in the rest of the world? Not what a lot of people think. But anyway. So the Tale of Genji is extremely notable and important for a lot of reasons. And honestly, it should be studied in school all around the world, as it often is. I'm kind of annoyed that
people whose entire job, including like, you know, the translator, right?
Yep.
And many other people where all they do is study the Tale of Genji, you know, the same way that like, you know, rabbis study the Torah. You know, they just have, this is like a significant portion of their lives is studying, you know, this single book, and not just the story itself, but the entire context around it, you know, historically, culturally, etc. Because you have this extremely long book written by a person at a time in history, right, further in the past than any other such work. And just by reading it and, you know, looking at other physical artifacts surrounding it, you can learn a whole lot about, you know, that era and what was going down.
Yep.
And that's actually how I decided to make this the book club book. Is I had heard of the book, and I had a general idea of what its deal was. But then they had an exhibit at the Met Museum over in Manhattan. And since I live in New York City, one morning I think I woke up on like a weekend and Twitter was like, I had known the exhibit was there, but I think Twitter or something reminded me that like it was the last weekend for the exhibit. So I'm like, I got nothing doing. You want to just go over there? All right. Just got on the train and went over there. Just check it out, right? We went, you know, and I checked it out. And I learned a lot of things there that will probably be discussed if we, you know, in the second episode about this book. But after going to that exhibit, I was like, well, I guess I should make this the book club book, right? We can read this, and I need to choose one. So, you know, I don't even remember what the previous book club book was.
Actually, so we have done a grand total of, I was looking at our book club book history, trying to remember, we've done 29 books. And the one we did before this was Pages of Pain, it looks like.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, on the one hand, that's more books than I thought. But on the other hand, in 15, that's 2 books a year. That's not a great rate.
We did a lot pretty quickly for a while.
4 books a year.
Yep,
right?
I feel like 4 is a good. We did a lot, like, densely for a while.
I don't mean getting the average up to 4 books a year. That'll mean we'll have to do 8 books a year for a while. I mean, just get the rate from here on out up to 4 books a year.
Yeah. Yeah, because part of the joy is reading a book like together. Like, we're assuming you read the book too. If you didn't, you're gonna have no idea what we're talking about.
Coming soon.
Yeah, spoilers. Genji dies like 2/3 of the way through this thing. Like, both later than I expected, based on I learned that he dies in the middle of the book early on, and I was kind of waiting, like, when's he gonna die? When's he gonna die? But also, there is more book after he dies than I expected there to be. But yeah, lots of spoilers, but also we're like, one, I have to refer to notes to really remember which character is which, and I frequently was mistaken about who someone was, and the only way
in the book.
Yeah, the only way I was able to avoid that was that after the first 10 chapters, every time I finished a chapter, I would stop, and the next day I would read a summary of that chapter, from an external source, like a Cliff Note type thing, just to see if that lined up with what I got out of the chapter. And usually it was really spot on, but every now and then something, I just missed something completely. Something stupid obvious in retrospect. And it's partly just an artifact of the writing style and the language and partly the translation. But a thing I was thinking about a lot, I was mentioning this to Scott before we started the show. We recently read The Odyssey, which had a very modern, fantastic translation by Emily Wilson. So the interesting thing about that translation was that it took the text and modernized it. That made it easier to consume, understand, and enjoy to a modern audience. The Tale of Genji would be harder to do because the things that are missing from the book, especially in the earlier chapters, for me as a modern reader, those words are not there. They're only inferable from the text and from context. A translation that did what Emily Wilson did to the Odyssey would actually have to add a lot of context and words that are not there. Yep. And I don't know if that still counts as a translation or if that gets into full-on adaptation territory.
It would have to be like a Talmud situation. I don't know if people know what the Talmud is. It's a Jewish book. It's a Jewish set of books, and basically if you ever open one up, right, it's like these huge red books, and in the middle of each page will be a section of the Torah or the Old Testament, right?
Yep.
And all around the edges, in the margins, there's these different sections, and it's basically different comments from different rabbis throughout history, right? Explaining what it means or what they thought about it, and they're getting in the margins. It's all these. So the majority of the book is notes telling you that the real original text is in the middle, and everything else is so it's sort of like reading a newspaper article and putting the comments all around the sides from all the people. So I think if you want to make the Tale of Genji more readable, right, you would do something like that. But then how long would it take you to read that fucking thing, right? You would read a page, and then you read all these comments from all these different scholars telling you explaining what the heck that was.
That's something I gave up on early on. The first few chapters, I would click on footnotes to get the context, but there are so many footnotes. That was so interruptive to my reading process that I just gave up on that.
Yep. All right, so we're going to spend this episode from here on out talking about just the story, pretending that this was just like a book we just read.
Yep.
Right? Just like any other book. And then we'll do another episode where you talk about all kinds of meta stuff, history stuff, stuff about the author, stuff I saw at the museum, right?
Yep.
Stuff about novels as a form.
Yep, that one we'll probably either do the next Thursday episode or the following one, just because I'm going to brush up a little bit, read some Wikipedias on Heian era.
I'm just going to talk about stuff that I know and not research additional things. Because it's what's the point? If someone out there wants to know those additional things, you can go research them on the internet yourself. Right?
I guess not to not just to regurgitate in the show, more that I want to confront
people who are professional scholars about this. If you really want to know, you can find them. Right?
It's more I want to read
to tell you.
The part I want to read about specifically is the debates over all the college years chapters of this book and who actually wrote them, because there's one chapter in particular where
the gist.
Yep. But there's one chapter in particular where I just I clicked on a footnote, and which one was it? It was near the end. Near the end of Genji's life, he dies, and then I think it was the second or third chapter, whichever one it was. I just remember the footnote basically said that this chapter may be a ahistorical forgery for political reasons, written later and inserted, and there was a whole thing that I'm just curious about now. But yeah, we're going to treat this like it's just a book we read, and I don't regret reading this. I enjoyed it. The only thing that really stands out to me that's hard to reconcile is that on one hand, the last part of the book was easier to read and easier to understand, but the story was both more compelling and less compelling in that it almost felt more like a modern novel, but the story felt a little more contrived, like it was, I'm going to figure out a way to make drama happen with a narrative on purpose. Whereas most of the Tale of Genji up to that point was more like, here's a bunch of characters, what would happen? Like, it just sort of follows like what would logically happen based on what would, like, the story that was presented, and it kind of just flows and then just sort of peters out. But the drama feels way more constructed after Genji dies.
Well, I think, before Genji dies, the form of the novel is there is a narrator who is like basically telling you like, oh, this happened, then this happened, then this, right? And then the narrator breaks the fourth wall on a very few occasions, and they say things like, oh, but yeah, I don't remember all of that.
Yep.
Right,
or
details.
Genji said heartfelt words that it would be improper to repeat to you here.
Yeah, stuff like that, exactly. But yeah, after Genji dies, I think, it's still a third-person narrated book. So-and-so did this, so-and-so did that. But I think the presence of that narrator is sort of gone.
Yeah, well, it's replaced by, there's a lot more he said, she said, paragraph explaining where the fuck someone is. Like, where are we? That was not in the first part of the book, really.
Yep. It's very different.
Like when the ghost kill, like way early on, when a ghost shows up and murders someone Genji's having sex with, which like that happens way early, and it's not the first ghost murder, but I would like it surprised me that I had to back up and reread that section again. One, to figure out no, literal ghost is what they're talking about, and two, wait, where are they? They went to some abandoned house, like just somewhere. Like they just fucking snuck away to an abandoned house, and it was not clear. I did not get that in my first reading.
All right, so basic plot summary, right? Because despite being fucking long, obviously, not that much happens in these books.
Yeah.
If you could list the things that happened and just very quickly. All right. So it's really separated into three sections if you think about it. And the first section is like young Genji, right?
Yep.
He's, Rim, he's like, oh yeah, he's coasting through life.
Sleepwalking
whatever, right?
Through life, no real responsibilities.
He's a teenager of great privilege and talent and skill and beauty, and he's taking advantage of it, and he's horny, and he's, his dad's the emperor, so he's just, doing his thing, right?
It's almost even better because his dad's the emperor, but he's not the heir, so he's almost like has all the wealth of the emperor's son, but none of the responsibilities.
Right. So then the second part is like, okay, Genji's sort of an adult now. So he's not the emperor, but he does have a lot of responsibilities, even though the book never talks about those responsibilities. But he's like, a chancellor or a counselor, all kinds of different government positions.
But you see, he's also that's the point where he's the story. Like, it's almost like he fucked around and he starts to find out. Like, that's where suddenly. One, there's a bunch of times where consequences happen, which wasn't happening in the earlier parts of the books. Or two, something he did before
restricted it because he can't get away with stuff. That he got away with when he
stuff he did. Stuff he did before catches up with him.
He also cares about things more than he did before.
I remember there was one chapter then right before he goes on exile where he's just like.
Well, the exile's sort of the transition point.
Yeah, for a bunch of things, but like he could just run away. Like he's about to get caught fucking around, and he's like, I can run away. And then he's like, you know what? No, that actually isn't going to work out. I gotta be an adult here. I can't just run away. They're going to catch me anyway. I've got to deal with this. Like it was a significant like transition that happened over the course of one paragraph. And then he goes into exile pretty soon after.
Right. So that second part where Genji's an adult, it really slows down and zooms into the status quo scenario where Genji lives in this house.
Yep.
Right. With these, with his ladies and all his staff and servants and all these goings on at his house and the court drama, right? Since he's now such a significant person, and also the drama of the people that are close to him and related to him.
But it's all. Right? But the part that I thought most interesting about that part of the book was that. In the beginning,
that's the significant, famous part of the book. Really.
It's the most interesting by far because the court drama is.
I think that's what makes It's like, you know, even if something was the first novel technically, right? It's like it wouldn't have, you know, been such a significant studied historic thing if there wasn't any sort of merit to it. I think most of the merit of the story is in that middle section there.
Absolutely, because what I like is there in the first part there's no real undercurrent. It's just there's political drama, but Genji's so beautiful it doesn't matter. Like he's a child, like who cares? But like he's just hanging out with his friend the captain and like just everything's great. But in the second part, it keeps like, especially when the court turns against him and there's a lot of background chatter about these evil times. And it's interesting because the book doesn't actually explain specifically what is happening in the court. It just shows that the displeasure of individuals that are part of that has cast him out of polite society for a while. Like, but it's definitely implied that there is danger there, that the government is like not stable, that the times are changing. Like there's an undercurrent that Genji's job actually did matter at that point a lot. And everyone's jobs mattered a lot because there's political upheaval. But
you can also see that political upheaval is reflected in the story in the forms of what activities all these nobles are partaking in, right? So like before the darker times, right, they're all having parties and festivals and
lot of music, a lot of poetry contests
and celebrating, right? And then later in the story they keep talking about how like no one plays the music like they did before, right? It's a lot it's just the level of festivity and, you know, luxury that's happening, you know, significantly decreases over time amongst the noble family.
That's the other thing I want to read about, because I wonder if in Heian era Japan there was an era of conservatism and asceticism that set in the government that this book was mirroring, while also having Genji's fortune sort of follow that same path.
Right. Well, I think also part of it is that, you know, you can tell, if you didn't already know this, you can tell from the book that, you know, no women, especially noble women in that era, right, were very cloistered, secluded, treated as objects, right? It's a very patriarchal, misogynist society.
Like literally, Genji can't look. Genji doesn't even see the face of half the people he has sex with. One of the chapters is literally he's trying to figure out which daughter of this guy he actually slept with the previous night because he's not sure.
But this book is written by a woman of that time who was like, you know, the daughter of like some like governor or something, right? I think that's what the name Murasaki Shikibu. I think what they said that it means is like Murasaki. That's the, you know, it's the name of like a flower, and it's the name of one of the characters in the book. That's sort of like her, you know, self-insert, right? And then Shikibu means like mass, like ceremonial something, right? And it's like, so that's like her dad's job, right? So they don't know the real name of this person, right? Much like we don't know the names of a lot of the characters because it wasn't polite to refer to people by their actual name at the time.
Which honestly is the thing that gave me the most struggle reading this book.
Right. But this author, right, you know, was similarly, much like the characters, was similarly sequestered, right, in society, right, hidden from view, right, not just walking about town seeing what's going on. So I think, you know, my guess would be, why didn't they write about like what's going on in the government? And because the person writing didn't know.
Well, either didn't know or knew, but it could also there could all
about goings on in the palace. That's the things they wrote about were things they knew. They didn't write about anything else.
Though two things that stand out to me around that are, the other thing that could be going on is depending on the time, the author may have avoided the topics that could have gotten them in trouble. That could have happened. But
also true.
I'm curious about why some of those things were left out, because there are a few points where there is dialogue from commoners. It happens once early on, but it happens a couple times later. Like
rare, but it's in there.
It happens a little bit when Genji's in exile because he's like not in the court town. Like he's basically, it's funny. He's like, I'm in the fucking boonies in the middle of nowhere. It's like I got forced to move to like upstate New York, and this shit sucks. But then you look at the map at the end of this goddamn book, he didn't go that far.
No, well, I mean,
It's like
it's not like he had cars.
Yep.
You know, someone pulled him in like a wagon or carried him in a,
Yep.
it's like
But
you can't go that far.
there's a few points along the way where you get dialogue from regular ass people, and every time that occurs, those characters talk like normal human beings, and that really doesn't happen at any other point until the college years part of this book, where there's a lot more like structured dialogue than there was in the beginning. And
it could have just been, I don't know if that's an artifact of the original text or if the translators did that on purpose.
That's one of the things I don't know.
So, second part of the book, right, is the court drama of, Genji and all his people. They live in the city next to the palace.
Yeah.
Things go on, right? And Genji finally dies, right? Because you don't live that long in that era.
He's like barely 50. Like they don't make it that far.
Yeah, no one lives that long. They're like, oh man, I'm 50. I'm like real. If someone's more than like 40, like they're considered like old, retire. Right?
Yep. I mean, look, his half brother, the guy who was emperor briefly, he has to abdicate because he's dying, like he's sick. While Genji's still actually doing pretty well. Like we get to yet another emperor, while Genji's still just fine.
Yeah, the guy goes up to the mountains. Right?
Yep.
But yeah, so then after Genji dies, the focus shifts to these other two characters, right?
It's his grandson.
Well, Kaoru is not his grandson.
Well,
Kaoru
let me pull up that chart of the characters again.
Right. Kaoru is, I guess, legally Genji's son, right? But what actually happened was Genji's the wife of one of the wives of Genji, that was Kaoru's mother, actually got it on with, the intendant, right?
Yep.
Kashiwagi.
No, I love this because in the first part of the book,
this is like a major part of the story, the Kashiwagi thing. It's like, it takes like 2 chapters at least, or it's like the biggest chapter in the book is like all about this one drama. It's like,
But what I love about that drama is how much it parallels the very beginning of the Tale of Genji, with there's the relationship that was expected, the relationship that wasn't expected, Genji gets born, whatever, but then you get the point where Genji is sleeping with the wrong person, and the Emperor's son is actually Genji's son, and now the same thing sort of happens to Genji.
Yep, so anyway, but yeah, so Kaoru, who is, I guess, legally Genji's son, but, probably Kashiwagi, almost definitely Kashiwagi's, biological son. And then there's this other guy, I forget his name.
Oh, Kuimo the friend guy.
Yeah, the friend guy. But basically, it's like, here you see a lot of tropes.
Kimono Kari, I think.
Yeah, you see it in this story, you got these two guys, and there's a lot of tropes that I think have carried to the present day, right? You've got the one dude who's like, buff and sexy and, naughty, just like raping people and whatnot. And then you got, Kaoru, who's like, he's very, religious and, reserved, right? And, uptight. And you got the parallel between these two dudes, and they basically fight over the daughters of this dude who lives in the mountains or lives in a village, and they just fight over his daughters for like several chapters, and then the end, so abruptly the end.
And it escalates. Like the thing is, unlike all the stuff that happens in the first part of the book, that conflict escalates rapidly to a faked death, an attempted suicide, and they lose. Like they both lose in the end. Like it's a radically different ending from how those dramas ended in the first part.
Right. It's like, but on the one hand, it does keep escalating, but also the fundamental drama doesn't change. It's like they're still fighting over these ladies. They're still fighting over these ladies. Okay, something happened, but these two dudes are still fighting over these ladies. It's like it just stays that way.
But I like how in the end, she's basically like the one girl is just like, fuck it, I'm gonna be a nun and fuck both y'all. Like, I'm not even going to respond to your letters.
A lot of people throughout the entire book go off to become nuns or monks when they're done with noble biz. Right?
I mean, Genji kind of does that.
Something you can do as a luxury of being noble is that you can afford to just go into the,
Yeah, well, that's just, in Roman history. Like, there's the same thing of, fuck the Roman Empire. I retired. I'm going to take care of my turnips. This is your problem now. Like, I'm
Not
done.
Go be a hermit.
Yep.
Yeah.
I can appreciate that desire.
Oh yeah.
I would retire now if I could.
Right, so we'll zoom in a little bit more on part 1. Right?
Yeah.
So in part 1, you got Genji, and his mom is like a consort of the emperor, right? The Kiritsubo consort, right?
Yep.
But and like the emperor like totally thinks she's awesome, right? And thinks Genji is awesome too.
Yep.
But technically, this other consort of the emperor, the Kokiden consort, right, is like the more important one.
Yep.
Right? So the Kokiden consort's son, Suzaku, is going to be the next emperor, not Genji.
Yep. And Suzaku's okay. Like, he's not a bad person, but that drama kind of drives everything that happens to Genji in the second part.
Right.
Like, that is...
Right. So since Genji's not the heir, he goes around, doing all sorts of shenanigans. But meanwhile, Genji is the most beautiful, the most perfect, the most talented, the most beloved, the perfect, like everything person, right? It's like when he dances at the festival or sings or poetries or anything, he's like the best. It's like, this guy's the best at everything, right? Just the perfect dude, except for all the bad things he does.
Yep.
Right.
And
so Genji goes around sleeping with all kinds of ladies.
Yep, and it's interesting how some of them are super dramatic, like the ghost murder. Some of them are just absolute shit shows that are just hilarious. There's a big mix of what happens, but it's interesting in terms of his taste because he doesn't seem to care that much who he actually has sex with for most of the first part, because the only person he actually wants to have sex with all the time is the woman who reminds him of his own mom. Like,
right. Well, I think all of it is having to do with his mother issues.
Like,
right?
He's mother issues are such a big part of Genji's life. It is sad and funny, and it stands out a lot to a modern audience.
Right. So one of the emperor's other consorts, right, wives, is Fujitsubo.
Yep.
Right, who is extremely significant in the book, right? And that's like, so Genji gets with her, and she has a baby, and that baby is actually the third emperor, Reize.
Yep.
Everyone, basically, it's a very small number of characters who know that is not the emperor's son.
The funniest scene in the whole goddamn book is they think they got away with it, and then like a few chapters later, like the kid's a little older, and the emperor, the emperor Reize is just like, hey, or is that Susan? Oh God, I forget their fucking name.
Well, because the reason that the hint that gives it away to the cat, like because you're reading the book as the reader.
Well, the hint is he looks exactly like Genji.
Right, it's like he's way hot, just like Genji.
But the emperor invites Genji over, and they're like hanging out, and Genji shows up, and he sees the kid for the first time in like a little while.
And looks like him.
Yep, he's just like, fuck, shit. How do they not know? They're gonna find out. And the emperor is very, very like, there's a whole scene where the emperor is like talking to Genji, and the whole time Genji's quietly panicking that he's about to be executed.
Yep. But yes, but I mean, after getting with Fujitsubo, right? Genji, is like, that's like his number one.
He's obsessed with her to the point that even she is like, dude, like, you've got to calm down, kid.
But he can't, their relationship from then on out is very, distant, right? It's like Genji keeps trying to talk to her more, or it's like he just, because of the way the society is and whatnot, he just, he's sort of forced away from her.
Yep.
She becomes a nun at one point.
Well, it's interesting because she is not stupid. And she is like, Genji, yeah, sure, we could, I wouldn't mind, but you realize how much shit we're in? Like, this is a dangerous situation. You've got to just, not bother me for a little while. And he is incapable of this.
Right. So that's the first most important, I guess, person that Genji's getting with, right? I guess it's worth mentioning, Genji has this legal wife, Aoi,
who only shows up 2.5 times.
And she dies very young, which Genji, I guess, doesn't really like her or care about her. And that's sort of convenient for Genji.
There's a whole chapter that really paints her as being extremely angry and difficult, which take with a grain of salt because Genji was ignoring her. all her fortunes were ruined by being married to Genji. The whole like left of the palace is angry at the fact that she was basically forced into a marriage with Genji instead of the real crown prince. So like there's a lot of drama that comes out of that relationship. But basically the only time she appears is what? She forces the other woman out of the way with her carriage and causes a bunch of drama that Genji has to go apologize for. And then she has Genji's kid and dies.
Yep. So
and then Genji ignores the kid for like a year. Like
right. All right. So now you've got, I guess, the second most important character, right? Which is the author, where the author's name comes from, who's Murasaki, right? So Murasaki, and this is where the Genji the creep enters the scene.
Well,
right?
Genji the hebephile creep, as opposed to just Genji the creep.
It's borderline
well,
there, right?
It's pedophile at this point. The only saving grace is Genji does not appear to actually do anything until she's a little older.
Sure.
But
anyway.
Yeah. I guess to her credit, when he finally does, she is like, "What the fuck, Dad?"
Yeah.
There's a whole chapter where she is like, this is not what I signed up for. WTF.
Yep. So anyway, Genji finds this girl, Murasaki, somewhere, right? And he's like, holy shit. And I guess, the girl reminds him of his mom. Right?
Yep. This is where it's both kinds of creepy. He's like, well, I want to continue to have sex with my pseudo mom, but I can't because I'll get in trouble. So I have found a girl who I can groom to be just like her.
Yeah, he finds this like very young girl, extremely young, Murasaki, and he basically keeps trying to pressure and convince, right, the girl's guardians to like, listen, I'm basically the emperor's my dad, right?
Yep.
So I'm a super rich, noble dude. Let me have this girl. I'll raise her as my daughter. I swear to you that my intentions are pure, right?
And to their credit, they are basically like, lol, there is no way we are giving this girl to you.
1000, they're like, what the fuck is wrong with you?
One of the lines I mentioned, when we were doing a meta moment like a year ago, was because this is still really early in the book, but it was something like, this Genji certainly has modern tastes. Like, I guess this is what nobles are like today. It's a conversation, I want to say, between like the woman who's her guardian and that guy who's there, like the two people who are sort of taking care of her. It's like just a side conversation that happens. But he just fucking kidnaps her and hides her in his house and ploys her with toys, and it is 100% creepy groomer, like the whole time.
He grooms Murasaki basically through her entire childhood.
To be exactly like his mom, or his mom fetish, and to like get her, like he tricks her into sitting on his lap, like even through the translation and the history and 1,000 years of humanity. You read this today and you're like, yeah, it is as creepy as it feels like it is.
Yep, it is creepy AF. Genji is no good.
But what the fuck, Genji? He finally like convinces her to marry him despite the fact that it's a bunny drop where even she is like, no. And then he immediately cheats on her.
Bunny drop, isn't it?
Yeah.
Only it's a forced bunny drop. The bunny drop guy, right? He landed on him.
Yep.
Whereas Genji went out and tried to get it on purpose.
Yep. Genji bunny dropped on purpose.
It's even worse than bunny drop. Somehow.
But the worst thing,
possible.
the thing that actually like made me really not like Genji, because up to this point, not like Genji was funny, even if he's kind of a bad person. But as soon as he actually marries her and it's real, he immediately cheats on her and actually just kind of ignores her for a long time. Like, he doesn't give a shit about her anymore.
Yep. So he's got, then
he marries that other girl.
Right. Well, okay. So hold on. So we got Murasaki so important, right? It's like basically the focus of most of the book, right? So he grooms this girl all through her childhood, but then when you get to the second part of the book, she's basically like the perfect heroine. Like, Genji did such a good job grooming her that she became the most amazing woman that everyone loves, who is perfect and smart and wonderful and is the greatest, and everything about her is amazing. And that's why she's sort of like the author self-insert deal.
Yep. Right? She is like literally perfect in every possible way, and it is telling.
She's absolutely the one that Genji actually loves the most, that's still alive.
Yep. But it was interesting how quick.
Like when she dies, there's like a whole chapter of people crying, whereas other people like an emperor dies in like a sentence, like middle of a paragraph.
Yep.
Murasaki dies, it's like, there's more text for Murasaki's death than there is for Genji's death.
Yep. But
it's just so much mourning and wailing But
Genji definitely does not like fully appreciate her until it's too late. He gives up. He doesn't interact with her that much.
No, but he's also a jerk to the very end, because even at the end, right, she really wants to go, become a nun or whatever, and Genji is like, no, absolutely, he doesn't let her until, basically ever.
Yep.
She's what she really wanted.
She's very clearly trying to be a nun to kind of get away from his crap.
Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, Murasaki, the author is named after her, right?
Yep.
Extremely important part. This whole grooming thing is like I guess like it's almost like the main thread of the whole first 2 parts of the book, right? It's, I guess, bigger than any other threads.
Yep.
All right, so one more, right? So you got the Akashi lady, right? So Genji's like out in this, I guess, place called Akashi, I guess. I don't know. And he gets with this.
What was it? That was when the after exile he went with that captain, right?
Like it was hard to follow.
Yeah, but like
so early in the book, I read it like at least a year ago.
Yeah, but I want to say he goes out there with him. And that dude is just like, holy shit, Genji's perfect, and I think he has the hots for my daughter. I have to make sure they have sex.
But anyway, the Akashi lady, right? Genji likes her, I guess, okay, and she ends up, moving to his house, but she sort of just like lives in the house quietly on her own, off in a corner somewhere, and doesn't get a lot of attention from anybody. She's just sort of like, well, I guess,
But like it's
Genji once, and now I live here, and I guess I'm living comfortably. Okay.
Yeah, but that's his father. Like the father was, I'm pretty sure it was her father, was just like really trying to get them together, like vaguely hoping Genji would marry her just to like give her wealth and a better life. Like there was definitely a like sitcom plot around them conspiring to get Genji to like her enough to maybe marry her.
Yeah,
it was like this long shot.
The Akashi lady's daughter, right, ends up being a huge plot point in the second half of the book, because this whole thing of like, Genji trying to like set her up with a good life and, like convince, get her married to the right person, right? He ends up being able to get her married
to the emperor,
ends up being the 4th emperor, right? He's like, he basically, he sets her up with the heir. While the 3rd emperor, Reize is the emperor. He gets her set up with the heir. He's still a kid at the time.
Reize, remember, is Genji's actual child with his fake mom.
Right. Yeah. Right. So exactly when Genji's biological son is the emperor, right? He gets, the Akashi lady's daughter hooked up with his grandson, right? Yeah, because the 4th emperor would be.
So
the 4th emperor isn't the son of Reize.
No, the 4th emperor is the child of the 2nd emperor, Suzaku. Let me find that fucking chart that you sent me before. I got a tab open here somewhere.
The 2nd emperor.
Yes, Suzaku emperor.
Right.
Married someone on the right, and then that is the emperor, that the Akashi princess. That's sort of what I meant about this sort of constructed feeling that maybe we'll talk about more in the meta show, where the first 2/3 of this book is almost like the map of relationships just centers around Genji directly, because that's what's driving the story. But the last third of the book almost feels like the author took those relationships and constructed the drama they wanted from like all the characters that were available from the first part of the book. That's just kind of how it felt to me as the reader.
Right. And so then you come to, I guess, in the second part of the book, right, where Genji's got the house and everything. There's a major drama that develops, right, with regards to Suzaku's daughter, right? So Suzaku has the 2nd emperor, Suzaku, has a bunch of daughters.
The one who was emperor when Genji was exiled, partly because of drama from his own family. Like, he liked Genji.
His half-brother.
Yeah.
Right? So his half-brother has daughters, but the half-brother is going to go into the, to the mountains to live, right?
Because he had to abdicate because he was probably sick. Like it was like he couldn't do his job anymore.
Right. And so he's trying to get these daughters, set up with good lives before he leaves, right? So someone can support them. And he's basically hemming and hawing. And the daughter he cares about most is the third one. He's got these other ones, but he cares about the third one the most.
Yep.
Right?
Well, because she's the daughter of the Fujitsubo, like that line.
Well, but she was the daughter who, I forget if that was I forget which daughter is the one that hangs a piece of paper on the post when they move out of the house.
Oh God.
There's a whole big thing about that. Right?
I think that was her.
Yeah.
The problem is I always get confused with Fujitsubo, the Fujitsubo princess. Like they Fujitsubo something. It happens a lot in that part of the book, and I lost track.
There's a lot of names that are reused. For example, right? Genji lives in a house called Rokujo. What is Rokujo? It's literally, Hachiroku, like initial D. It's 6th Street, right? His house is on the 6th Street in the city where the palace is, right?
Which was very obvious when I saw the map at the end of this book.
Yeah. Yeah, there's another house called Ichijo. That's on the 1st street. There's a different noble house on each street. And the people, because it's I guess impolite to refer to them by name, they'll be like, "Oh, when they talk about the Kokiden consort, that's like the consort that lives in Kokiden,
It's like I'm the Crescent Street podcaster.
In the palace, the areas of the palace, the wings have different names, and people get named after the wing that they live in or the house that they live in.
Oh, Scott, I heard the Packard Square podcaster is talking about the Tale of Genji with the Astoria podcaster.
Right, exactly. That's how they're referring to people, right? It's like, the Queens boy and the Texas boy, right? The Madison Avenue guy and the Times Square guy.
Yeah.
That's what's going on here. So that's why it gets confusing when people move, because people move, their name fucking changes.
Yep.
Some name someone else had before. There'll be like a Rokujo lady, and then there'll be another Rokujo lady who's not the same one as the last Rokujo lady.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyway.
In fact, the Rokujo lady had a daughter that was the daughter that married the emperor that was Genji's son, the Reize emperor.
Anyway. So right, so the second emperor is trying to figure out, I got to give this third princess, that's my most important princess, I got to get her the best husband. Who do I give her to?
The best person I know, Genji.
Right. He's like, he thinks about all these other options. He doesn't like Genji. Right. You can tell he recognizes the reasons not to go for Genji.
Yep.
Right? Which there are many. But when he looks at everyone else, he's like, I guess it'll be Genji then. Right. So
I got the impression he had mixed feeling because he liked Genji in some ways. Like he's actually pretty nice to Genji considering what he knows Genji did. So
yep. But anyway, so Genji ends up sort of being forced to marry this princess that he's not really interested in.
Well, the emperor publicly asks him, meaning he can't say no. But there's no consequence of saying no except personal ruin. So
yep. And so the book portrays this third princess, right? Basically as an annoying child, right? That doesn't, she's not very talented, whatever. But Genji's forced to spend a lot of time with her, even though he doesn't want to, just because he has to, right? And then Murasaki, the groomed wife that he actually likes, is upset about that.
Yep.
Why aren't you spending time with me? Why are you spending time with this annoying?
You spent all this time grooming me, and now you're not even going to hang around? You're going to hang around with that brat? Great.
Yeah.
I'm going to go be a nun.
Yep. So, Genji doesn't, actually seem to like the third princess, but he's sort of forced into it. He doesn't have much of a choice.
Yep.
And so now he's got 4 ladies living in his house, right? All in different wings, all with different names. But, basically this third princess and Murasaki are the ones that matter in terms of the plot the most.
Now, one thing that I thought was really interesting about that, as the house in particular, was that throughout the book, you get glimpses of all the women are cloistered separately from the men, obviously. And when we're zoomed in, we usually see all the men talking to each other, or Genji talking to a woman through a screen. That's the
they're
main.
Usually also talking to people not directly, but through messaging.
Well, yeah, through Yugao. Yugao is Genji's go-to, get a message.
Yeah, it's like they talk to someone and then the person goes and it's like a little back and forth with their servants sharing the messages between them, or always writing letters all the time.
But it always, every time those things happen, it's clear that on the side of the screen that the book doesn't portray, where all the women are hanging out, the women all read the love letters together. And they all know what's going on.
It'll be like a woman with all of her, I guess maidens,
retainers,
and retainers, and all these a whole group of people. You're not just talking to this one person, right? It's they always have people near them.
When Genji writes some letters, the women are like, "You've got to respond to him, otherwise we look bad. Go have sex with him. Seriously, come on." If you don't have sex with him, it personally affronts me.
Why don't you want to bang him? I'll bang him for you.
Yeah, can I bang him for you? He won't even know. Yeah, that happens. It felt like there was tons of drama just behind the screen that was not really portrayed directly during those chapters of the book. You get the impression all the women of the house were having all this drama around the Genji situation, but that was just an undercurrent because I don't think the books really ever go behind the screen, except the one time where Genji's back there and he gets caught during that storm in that 18th or 19th chapter.
I mean, there are times where they talk about the people were busy and were elsewhere, so someone was able to get around and make mischief.
Yeah.
Right? And so that is actually one of the most important parts, where Kashiwagi, right, who's this guy, the intendant, right?
Yep.
The intendant is sort of like a lesser Genji. He was Genji's friend. He's a talented, wonderful dude, right? But he's actually in love with this third princess that Genji has been forced upon.
Yep. But he marries the other princess.
Right. He's legally, right, so he's legally married to the second princess, but he doesn't really like her, and she, is right? He likes the third princess.
And the third princess is legally married to Genji, but doesn't really like it. Well, she's just annoying and a problem generally.
Right. But Kashiwagi actually loves the third princess, and so he eventually finds that, he keeps going there and calling on her and finding excuses to get closer to her and whatnot, even though she stays so distant from him. And
kind of like what Genji was doing in the entire first third of the book.
Yep. He just keeps trying, and, Genji's friends with him. Genji likes him, so it's not that, awkward for him to be around, hanging around his house,
But then his daughter is Kaoru. His son is Kaoru.
So he gets finally, the right timing, right, when there's not a lot of ladies behind the screen besides that third princess, and he goes in there and makes his non-consensual move.
Yep,
right, as is so often in this book.
The thing that was interesting is in the earlier parts of the book, the less consensual and non-consensual sexual encounters were much more vaguely described. This one was very much more now's my chance, and he storms in. It was much more abrupt, and it felt more violent the way it was written.
Yeah, I mean, this book will never say in it they fucked, but the book will be yes, they he stayed there late.
Yep.
It's like wink, wink. It's that kind of deal. But this scene was yes, he stormed through the curtain and carried her. It's he's picked her up. He's got his hands on her, and they actually said that. It's they did it. They made babies, and sure enough,
they made one baby at least.
Yeah, the baby that they make, the intendant and the third princess, right, is Kaoru, who's the main character of the final part of the book.
Yeah.
Who is, I guess legally Genji's son, but biologically almost definitely the intendant Kashiwagi's son.
Yep. So in this chart,
that's the major drama of the second.
In this chart, I'm looking at to remember the names of all these characters. So this chart is great because it has a line for formal marriage, a line for child of doubtful parentage, which is what they use for that. Then there's a line for sexual relations without issue, and a line for sexual relations with issue.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And that describes the Tale of Genji more than anything, is those 4 types of relationships.
Yep. So that's pretty much the plot of, all the significant plot points. There's a lot of other little tiny side stories here and there that are brief or whatnot.
There's one chapter that's basically just like, there was a chapter that really confused me. It was around a little bit after the exile time, but skimming over some footnotes, apparently that one was mostly allegory to well-known Chinese literature that anyone reading this book in a contemporary time would have known that we just didn't know.
Yep. So that's the plot, right? As a plot goes, it's like there are some parts of it that are interesting or compelling or dramatic, but overall, it's like it doesn't. It's not like trying to say anything like a lot of modern novels do, right?
I think the third bit, like the college years after Genji dies, it might have been trying to say a little more, because think about how it actually ends. It ends with
abruptly,
but it ends abruptly with these sort of pseudo Genji, like the cycle repeats, similar stories keep happening, but the difference is he goes to like do the grand gesture to get the woman back after he uncovers that her death was faked and she's actually like okay, and she's just like, nope, fuck you, and then it ends. Like, nope, this isn't gonna keep happening.
All right, so just other things about the story itself, right? So you get this plot, and even though you could describe the plot in much more detail, and there are more things going on, but the ratio of words to things that happen is really low.
Especially considering the words don't often describe anything in particular. They tend to just set the mood for a scene.
Well,
at length.
Set a mood for a scene, or describe in ridiculous detail everything, like things that don't matter, right? So they'll be like, if there's a festival going on, you could have several pages where they're like, this song was sung, and this person played this instrument, and they sounded great, and this person played this instrument in this mode, and they weren't as great, right? And these flowers were blooming, and they smelled like this.
But then one sentence in the middle of that will be like, oh yeah, this person's dead now. And you're like, wait, what?
Yeah, they're literally, I can't get over that, like, oh yeah, this emperor died and the next emperor took over, and fast forward. And like in a paragraph, in the middle of a paragraph.
Yep.
Like significant events in the world, right, are, it's like, you got a chapter that took you an hour to read, and half of it was just incredibly detailed descriptions of flowers or poems or whatever. Right. And nothing happening, nothing advancing, none of the dramatic, current circumstances being addressed, maybe not even any dialogue happening at all. And then maybe something will happen. Right.
Yep.
So if you just, I think, there is an abridged edition, which we declined to read. And I guess that's good. And
I'm glad we read the unabridged version, because I feel like we would have there's a lot of just mood and feeling that I could have internalized reading something so old. I'm glad I did it, but
if you want just the plot, you can cut this book down a lot.
Yep.
The plot could probably be, if you just tried to write the plot only, characters doing things happening, and you used modern language even, you could chop this thing down.
Though, and this is something
80% or more could just be.
This is something I actually don't want to dwell on, because one, we've gone almost an hour already, and I want to save this for the more meta show, but something that struck me, there was a specific moment, again, around the exile, because the writing style changed. Like, a lot of things shift around that time, not just the plot and the characters and like Genji growing up, but I think that around then is the first time a chapter ends and the next chapter just picks up where the previous one left off. Like, it's the same contiguous story. A lot of the earlier chapters, like a chapter ends and the next chapter is like 3 years later and Genji's with a totally different set of people.
Well, there's also times where it's like you'll have a chapter and they'll be like, this chapter covers from when Genji's 23 to when he's 24. It's like, okay. And the next chapter will be like, oh, this chapter covers from when Genji's 22 to 25.
Like,
it's
oh, wait, what? Yep.
Yeah. There will be, like, on a modern book, what you would do is you would keep things quite often, sometimes unintentional, you would unintentional, or sometimes in a modern book, you'll intentionally, not be chronological. but in a clever way.
Like the best example of this I've seen in my modern reading of anything is that one culture book, Use of Weapons.
Yep. So think about this in my life, right? So imagine I was still commuting to work, right? So I have my work life and then I have podcast convention life, right? So if you were going to write my life as a book, you'd be like, chapter 1, Scott goes to work. Chapter 2, Scott comes home from work and podcasts.
Yep.
Chapter 3, Scott goes back to work.
But imagine instead if it was like chapter 1, the PAXs Scott went to for these 4 years. Chapter 2, Scott's job for these 4 years.
Exactly, right? So it's like it becomes really hard to tell. Like, well, at the third PAX in chapter 2, it's like, was that like before or after the drama at Scott's work in chapter 4?
But I think part of that is that those worlds rarely intersect in this story. The things that happen in 2 different threads do not affect each other. That breaks a little bit in the last third, though, and that's sort of the stuff we want to talk about in the meta episode, because those later chapters, there's so much more like, this character went here and did this and is talking to this person sitting in this place, and then you get a bunch of dialogue that is like way more modern dialogue. It goes longer. It's structured more like a modern novel. Like if you read chapter 1 of Genji and then chapter like 48 of Genji back to back, they would not feel like they're the same book or the same author.
Yeah, but I guess in the case of Genji, this sort of split up will be like, okay, Genji was courting 3 ladies at once, or whatever, right? But we're going to have one chapter that's going to tell you all the instances of Genji courting Lady 1, and then the next chapter will be all the instances of Genji courting Lady 2, even though those things were happening concurrently, right? They're 2 separate plots. We're going to tell them to you in separate chapters, right?
Yep.
And so it becomes confusing, though, when you're trying to follow, right, the sequence, of who's who, what's happening, etc.
Yep, but it almost, like, to read this book to enjoy, if you're listening to this but you chose not to read the book for whatever reason, we were alluding to this in our meta moments along the way, if you just sort of roll with it, it is actually an enjoyable read. If you're just willing to not fully understand exactly what happened when. The story of all his interactions with Fujitsubo, really compelling story. Like, this is an adult and a man-child having drama, and it's a pretty good story. But if you try to, like, chronologically remember exactly how that lines up with him going after Mercy, just do not try. Yeah. It's not worth the effort unless you're doing lit crit on this book.
Right. I think the only reason to read the unabridged as we did is if you want to get all of that historical context, poetry, you want to get all those extra meta bits in there. If you just want to enjoy the story that is happening here, I would strongly recommend going for an adaptation. I'm sure
there's a manga that Emily
that I've heard is good.
Emily's read a bunch of it because she's been doing Japanese lessons online for a long time, and what they do is like read this manga together and like talk about it in Japanese. Like, that's a good way to brush up on your Japanese. But I kind of want to read this manga. I don't think it's translated anywhere.
Oh, okay.
I feel like that would clarify some of the nuances that I probably missed.
Well, also just being able to see people's faces would help with the name issue.
You know, it'd be really funny if the manga is just Genji sitting in front of various differently drawn blinds for the entire.
You could remember which curtain was which based on what's drawn on.
Yep.
But
also, if you just read it, like just rolling through it, there are so many legitimately really, really funny scenes. There's the scene where they're having sex secretly, and like the servants are right outside. Because remember, like their beds are so like this woman is in a bed that is surrounded by curtains, that is itself surrounded by blinds, that is itself in a room that has windows that are covered by their own blinds with guards outside. Genji is in there. They're having sex. And then a thunderstorm happens, and the captain of the guard runs in to check on the women because he's one of the few men allowed to go into that room. Guess who's hiding? Like, that whole scene is really funny. Or the old lady he's having sex with, where the husband finds out, and it's just like, yeah, I'm too old for this shit. You are welcome to sexually pleasure my wife. Like, by all means. And if you read read the Tale of Genji to get those scenes. I feel like it's better to enjoy them in the unabridged version just because you're almost reading and it takes you a minute to realize what's actually happening. And suddenly it's really funny when you realize like, oh shit, he's actually in that room right now. Oh, I get it.
Yeah. It's like somehow just like, you'll, if you just read and read and read and don't stop, don't try to go back and understand the sentence, right? It's like, that barest hint of what happened that like you smelled from afar, right? Even though there's no clarity, it's like a blurry haze, but you can sort of make out a little bit what happened. If you just keep going, when you reach the end of like a big long paragraph, it'll still be a fuzzy picture, but it'll be enough. And you just keep, and you'll understand.
Well, like when he has sex with that one woman, he's trying to have sex with, I think he was trying to have sex with Fujitsubo early on, and he fucks up and ends up in like the wrong servants' quarters. So he basically just has sex with this random woman who's just sleeping there, like quietly. And later on, he's like, "Oh shit, I didn't want to know who that is." There's another time where he has sex with that woman. He doesn't know what she looks like, and then he like does shenanigans to figure out who it is, and he sees her, and she's really ugly, and he's mad. And Yugao low-key makes fun of him for a while about it.
I guess I get one last thing is that the book has surprisingly a lot of supernatural stuff going on.
Oh yeah, so it's not that first ghost murder I talk about a lot just because that's really early on, but like Genji's wife was murdered by the spirit of like another character who is still alive, and that is treated as absolutely real in this story.
Yeah, there's like people who are sick it's like, Buddhist priests, monks come in and like try to pray the spirits away. And then like people who are sick will suddenly like rise up and start talking because, the spirit that was possessing them and making them sick is like, trying to tell you what they're mad about. Right. And like, that happens at least twice, I think, that kind of thing.
Yep, there are just ghosts and spirits. Doesn't Genji has a vision right before he goes out of exile where the dragon turtle king is like, "Hey, I got a daughter," and Genji's like, "I gotta get the fuck out of town."
Yep. So there's all kinds and the other thing is that there's a lot of disease going around. Right?
Oh yeah, I mean, look, how many emperors abdicate because they're dying in their 40s of like malaria?
Right. Well, Genji, that's basically the thing is like, Genji lives as long as he does despite having malaria.
Yeah.
But it's like, other diseases are not so specific. You probably couldn't figure out what they were without like, maybe you could never figure them out because there's not enough information in the book or some scholar knows. But you can see a lot of people get sick with various things at various times. Their medical technology is not great. There's just lots of sickness and unwellness is a frequent plot point amongst, many people from, Genji's legal wife, the Aoi that, he was forced to marry when he was young that he doesn't care about up through everybody. So,
but I guess what I'd leave you with on this is the plot by itself. Like if you read a summary of the plot, there's not much there, and it's not that interesting. It's only interesting to read summaries of the plot after you've read a bunch of the actual text to sort of bring it together, because the value, like what I enjoyed about this was reading the actual original text translated and like trying to just get myself into the mindset of this book from the year 1000-ish. So if you didn't read it, like honestly, just go, like you can find copies of it. Just read like the first 4 or 5 chapters. Just read a little bit of it. Even if you just listen to this whole thing, you'll find something to enjoy.
Read it if you have like some interest, right? Some reason to be interested, right? If you're just a person who likes to read a book and you pick this up as a book, you're probably not going to have a good time. But if you care about history or poetry or, culture or anything like that, then you're going to get the extra value.
Well, I always think back.
Reading the actual.
I have this old book. I think I got rid of it eventually. I think we gave it away or I donated or something. But I had this book that I got at Atlantic Books long ago. And it was a collection of like essays from Japanese authors in various ancient times. Like it was that kind of book. The kind of book Rim would buy in Wildwood. So, but the first essay in that book, because I didn't read beyond that, like this book was thick, was this guy from like 1200s Japan, and he was reading ancient Chinese literature and music, and his essay was he was sort of musing on how amazing it is to read the words a person from 1,000 years ago wrote 1,000 years later. And that stuck with me, especially because I was reading someone who himself had written that many hundreds of years before I came in, and humans have been doing this forever. So even if you don't do it with the Tale of Genji, do it with something. Read an old book.
We read the Odyssey.
Yeah, like read something old at least once. And honestly, the Odyssey, the Emily Wilson translation, it is really, really accessible. Like way more than you'd think from a book written in BC.
Yep. So yeah, we're gonna do one more. You know, since we put so much effort into reading this incredibly long book over such a long period of time, we are gonna do at least one more episode where we're gonna talk about not the actual content of the story, but all sorts of meta stuff around the book.
I got so much to say I've been holding back on in this episode.
Yep. So we'll let that all out because clearly we need to, and we need episode ideas, especially for Thursday.
Yep.
So we might as well. But we've also selected another book, and this book is a S-tier book that is the opposite of the Tale of Genji. And relatively speaking, it is like, extremely new novel.
Yep.
And when I knew that it existed, I said, I am reading the fuck out of that. Even before Rim selected it as the book club book, I knew I was going to read the fuck out of it. But I said, when I heard of the book's existence, I thought to myself two things. The first thing I thought was, it's going to be a series. It's the first book in a series. Therefore, I'm going to hold out and not read it until that series is done. Rim foiled that plan by selecting it as a book club book.
Because I learned Emily read it, so I got a lot of like, Rim, you should read it. Here's a thing about the book that will intrigue you. And everything Emily said was very much a, Rim, we have to read this book.
I knew I had to read this book. I just wanted to wait to read the book.
So the next book club book is...
Wait. So then the second thing that I thought to myself was, we should not select this as a book club book because I don't want to keep doing authors we already did. We got to mix it up.
Look at you, R. Scott Backer. You have decelerated at a rate that is worrying to me.
But anyway, this is Rim's choice because
The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin.
I am already. So it took us 2.5 years, however long, since June 2020 to read The Tale of Genji. I started reading this book this year, and it's only February 3rd. I am 80% done with this book.
Yep. Partly because you were under the
It was announced. I'm 80% done already.
You were under the misapprehension that I had already read it and we could knock out a book club book. I have not read this book yet. I read the prologue and then I stopped on purpose because I committed to finishing Genji. I finished fucking Genji.
Right. So we have the opposite problem now where we need to give the listener time to read the book if they haven't already. So listener, we'll probably do an episode on this book in, I guess, March, April at the earliest. Right? Give you some time to get the book and read it. Of course, it didn't take me that long at all. I'm going to be done probably in 2-3 sittings more at the most because it's easy to read compared to Genji. Oh, God, it's easy to read.
Yep, it is. It is kind of like how we played some PUBG the other day, and then when I played Fortnite the next night, it was like, wow, this is just such a breath of fresh air. Like, it does not take effort. I can just enjoy this.
Yeah. Also, now that I don't have any guilt of like I'm reading, because I felt guilty whenever I read something that wasn't Genji. Like I should be reading.
Oh yeah, I've got this great book that is like the history of liberalism as a concept in human history, and I forced myself to stop reading it because I wanted to finish Genji.
Yep. But now that guilt is gone, I am like reading, not just this book, but like all reading like, comics and also like voraciously, like, I don't have to feel guilty reading this other stuff. I'm just reading up a storm now. So, and I already got some good ideas for a book club book after we read do this one. Yeah. I guess that would be the summer reading book, right? So we'll see. All right. We're finally halfway done with this game.